You are tuned in to the Black Talk Radio Network. For podcasts and live program scheduling, visit us on the web at blacktalkradionetwork.com.
Hi, the Black Talk Media Project would like to invite you to become a member of the BTR Community subscription-based social media platform. BTR Community is a platform that was set up for the listening audience of Black Talk Radio Network, the #1 independent Black radio network online. For just $24 per year, your subscription gives you access to an interactive space to share information with like-minded people with your privacy guaranteed. Your subscription will go a long way to help us maintain and improve our current media platforms. It will also help provide a budget so that we can begin the task of establishing localized media centers and radio stations across the United States. The best way to show your support and appreciation for what we do here at Black Talk Radio is to subscribe. Help us to help you be informed. Join btrcommunity.com today.
The views and opinions expressed by callers, guests, and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of the Black Talk Radio Network and Black Talk Media Project. Black Talk Radio is new black media for the new millennium.
Just lift your eyes up, let your wise rise up. See the signs of the times, if it's time, rise up. Rise up when death and hell dwell among all God's people. When those we chose and trusted have become completely corrupted and inherently evil. When the feast that feeds you starves our Father's children. When snuff, porn, and pedo forms begin to get top billing, rise up. When famine claims millions, when justice gives blind eyes to billions, when the Lord's anger is no longer feared, if his protection is gone and your enemies are near, if you've seen the seas spill over and the mountains shake, break, and fall, if the moon ever turns blood red and you can't see the sun at all, rise up. No matter if the...
Peace and welcome to New Abolitionist Radio on the Black Talk Radio Network, a program that seeks to educate, inform, and agitate on the issue of 21st century legalized slavery, hosted by social activist and spoken word poet Max Parthas and Black Talk Media Project founder Scotty Reed. On this program, we discuss recent news on legalized 21st century slavery and human trafficking as it is practiced through the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, along with projects and people who help combat it. Today is the May 2nd, 2018 broadcast in the last month of our 6th season. Next month, we'll be in our 7th year. On and near this day in history, on May 1st, Gwendolyn Brooks, the first African-American awarded a Pulitzer Prize for poetry in 1950. And also on that day, Howard University was chartered in 1867. On May 2nd, the first game of National Negro Baseball League was played in Indianapolis, 1920. And on May 4th, CORE began the Freedom Rides from Washington, D.C. to force desegregation of southern bus terminals in 1961. Courtesy of Alabama political activists and abolitionists Swift Justice from the Free Alabama Movement and the Unheard Voices OTCJ Youth Movement, we've got a special guest joining us tonight, Christopher Scott Brewer, a Democratic candidate for District 33 of the Alabama House of Representatives. He's in favor or supportive of rolling back drug laws, retroactive sentencing reform, and cannabis legalization. Last night during our pre-interview conversation, Scott discovered that the Alabama state constitution has its own exception clause allowing for prison slavery. We'll talk about that and more. If you like what you hear tonight, the primary election is being held on June 5th, 2018, and the general election will take place on November 6th, 2018. Always remember to support candidates that support abolitionists. In our segment, The Slave Catcher Chronicles, we focus on how the New York Police Department continues to target minorities over white New Yorkers for marijuana arrests. Robert Ganji, the director of the Police Reform Organizing Project, said 93% of the nearly 4,100 pot possession busts made in the first 3 months of 2018 involved people of color, citing state statistics. We'll also cover Milwaukee, which had the same dirt uncovered, stating the city of Milwaukee and the ACLU of Wisconsin have reached a tentative settlement in a class action civil rights lawsuit alleging that Milwaukee police engage in stop and frisk practices targeting African Americans and Latinos. I know I said I didn't want to talk about fools, but the latest insane muckery has forced my hand, so I produced a couple of videos on Kanye West and Bill Cosby. I'll explain about those videos later. Speaking of new videos, former Rikers Island CO and New Abolitionist radio guest Robin K. Miller has released the trailer to her new series, Rock Island. Make sure that you get a chance, you check it out. Congratulations, Robin. Last week, we explained how Lee Correctional Prisons may have been staging gladiator games. A prisoner from Lee Correctional states that is exactly what happened. We'll try to play his video statement tonight. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration just opened up April 26th in Alabama, and it looks like a huge success. We'll play a clip from Brian Stevenson's interview on Democracy Now!, which he had yesterday. Maybe it will help in understanding. In direct action news, once again, we want to remind you about a call for a Juneteenth 2018 mobilization against prison slavery from SPARC this year. Supporters of Operation Push are calling on all opponents of mass incarceration and modern-day slavery internationally to honor the Juneteenth holiday, Tuesday, June 19, 2018, with a community organizing and direct action. In collaboration with my brother Henry Henderson in Columbia and Prismatic Dreams, I've arranged to put together a panel discussion and a spoken word performance on Juneteenth in Columbia, South Carolina. Hopefully, many of our community will attend. Another reminder, a nationwide prison slave labor work strike is being called for on August 21st. At least 6 states are already on board. If you know someone inside, tell them what's going down. Our abolitionist in profile tonight is William Henry Johnson, 1833 to 1918. He was a black abolitionist, politician, and crusader for the rights of blacks. A rider of the 21st Century Underground Railroad is James Owens, Jr., a Baltimore man who spent 21 years in prison for a murder he was always said that he did not commit. DNA evidence led to his release in 2008, and before the end of 2018, he is expected to receive $9 million in compensation. As usual, we'll dissect and disseminate current news and events related to 13th Amendment slavery from the perspectives of slavery abolitionists. We'll also update you on the Nixon tapes research team when we have an opportunity. Be sure to follow the information on our Facebook page at New Abolitionist Radio and also support our efforts by joining the community.blacktalkradionetwork.com and finding links on our abolitionist planning page. So let's get this started. Got a question or comment? You can call us at 704-802-5056. You can chat with us and others by logging in at uberconference.com/Black Talk Radio Network. Once again, I'm Max Parthas. What's happening, Brother Scotty?
Hey, what's good with you, Max? Shout out to, what's the sister name again? I do recall her interview, Robin K. Miller. Robin K. Miller. And what's the name of that? Is this going to be on TV? Is it going?
It's a TV series called Rock Island.
Wow, that's great, especially if it covers modern day slavery and human trafficking. That will be great in any capacity. That will be great, man. I know you said you made a video about Bill Cosby and Kanye West. I said what I've had to say in the past about Cosby. I'm gonna just say, no, I'm not gonna say anything on that. But let me say something about Kanye West. Kanye made those ignorant comments, which most people have heard. I did not hear them till today, about slavery being a choice. And then I'm seeing people splitting hairs about those choices. And I get what the people who are saying. They did have a choice. I get what you were saying. But that's not what Kanye implied. I get that I could be Frederick Douglass and I could choose to let this man continue to enslave me, or I can choose to, what did Frederick Douglass say about getting freedom with his feet? I can choose to escape like Harriet Tubman, and then I can also choose to go back and help other victims. So there were choices. There were choices being made. But what Kanye said, again, this is my problem with most of America, is reading comprehension or comprehending what you're hearing. Kanye West was implying that since slavery lasted 400 years, and if you want to get technical, it's still going on by way of the 13th Amendment. So that's 550 years on this continent of North America. But he was implying that it went on so long that, hey, they must have chosen to stay in slavery, which is it's a asinine, ignorant comment. But after I said what I had to say on social media about Kanye's statements, I chose then to turn the focus to something else he said that I am in complete agreement with. Kanye West said, I think that, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but Americans should be able to unite around the issue of prisons, which we know he talking about prison slavery, because we have his track, New Slaves, where he mentions Correction Corporation by name. So so I find it awful interesting. Again, I'm not faulting anyone for talking about, discussing, debating any aspect. Whenever slavery is the topic, then we should applaud that. Even if they bring it in a negative light, well, that just gives us a chance to bring the truth. But when he said that Americans should be able to unite around the issue of prison slavery, it's awful funny that nobody is latching on to that statement, and it's not getting an airplay, if you will, or it's not on the subject of people's minds. They just gonna leave that part out. And I absolutely am 100% in agreement that if we can't unite around nothing else as black people or as Americans, since Americans are most impacted by slavery, then what is there to unite around? We can't unite around that. Then I don't see us uniting around anything of substance. So those are my comments on Kanye. But I'm interested to hear your videos. I'll check them out.
I agree with you, Scotty. But when I put these things out, like when I make the videos on certain subjects and people, I usually mix it with poetry and music, and I let them tell their own stories. I don't even get my words in edgewise. I just let somebody else tell the story, usually the person who is in the spotlight. And that's what I did with this video here, where you'll hear him talking about it. And when you said about prison slavery, he was very specific in that interview about what kind of prison he was talking about. He specifically said mental slavery, and that we're under mental control. He wasn't talking about physical prisons in that aspect.
He mentioned prisons. He mentioned prison in the TMC interview.
He said it's a prison of the mind, is what he said.
So what do you mean? I got a soundbite, a chopped off soundbite? Because when he says that people should be able to unite around prisons, what came after that?
We could listen to it if you like. I have it on that video that I made.
We'll listen to it after our guest, and we'll hash that out, because I'm pretty sure he was talking about physical prisons.
I would like to think so, considering prison slaves, when he was talking about CCA and all of that in his music, and it's not the first time he mentioned it. So I would like to think that too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you would like to reintroduce our guest, and we could get ready to bring our guest, Mr. Christopher Scott Brewer, into this conversation.
Yeah, sure, Scotty. I was hoping to just mention a couple other things before we got to our guest. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Things. We still got about 3 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to point out that not only did I do the Kanye, but I also did one on Bill Cosby, again, using his own words to say what he's saying. And I showed where he gets his information, where his ideas about how teenage pregnancy and unwed women out here having babies are the problem for all black people. So it's pretty amazing to see that video. It's kind of long, so I'll put it on the forum so people can check it out. And also, I'm looking forward to hearing that clip tonight from Brian Stevenson. He said something that was just profound, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. So with that being said, let me go ahead and do as Scotty said and introduce our guest. First, I'd like to say thank you to our brother, Swift Justice, and his beautiful wife, and the people of the Free Alabama movement who helped make this happen. This brother, for those that don't know, is a political activist from behind bars, and he's getting more things done, making more impact than most people who are walking free every single day. It's an amazing thing to consider. Well, Christopher Scott Brewer, a Democratic candidate for District 33 of the Alabama House of Representatives, he's in favor, as I said earlier, from what I read of previous interviews, of supportive of rolling back drug laws and retroactive sentencing reform. So I guess he's saying, if we roll back these drug laws and we reduce the sentencing, we're going to make that retroactive. And that's a wonderful thing to consider. He's also seemingly in favor of cannabis legalization. Or maybe it's just that he sees the train coming and like, you ain't going to stop that, so we might as well get on. And last night we had a little bit of a conversation, and it was a very fruitful conversation. Just talking a little bit about, what we're doing here, and so he's not surprised when he came on air, and seeing where he stood at. And while we were conversating, he found out that the Alabama state constitution has its own exception clause to prison slavery. And I don't know if it was the first time he'd ever seen it, but it seemed like it was. I guess I'll ask him that once he comes on, because we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more tonight with Christopher Scott Brewer, a Democratic candidate for District 33 in the Alabama House of Representatives. Christopher, are you here? Or Scott, are you here?
Yes. Hey, how are you?
Welcome to New Abolitionist Radio. You've already spoke to me. I'm Max, and my co-host is Scotty Reed.
Greetings.
Scotty. Greetings. How are you?
I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing a lot better than so many other people out there, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about those people that have been impacted by modern day slavery. And that's not my term. I mean, that's a term we came up with, but it's based on the 13th Amendment, which Max just mentioned. You was made aware of the very same exception clause in the state of Alabama. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts on these issues, and thank you again for joining us.
Welcome, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, Scott, it's okay to call you Scott?
Absolutely.
Okay, Scott.
Well, Scott, if I could ask you to do this, if you could turn the volume of your microphone up just a tad, because you're coming in a little low.
Okay, I'm coming up.
That's perfect.
That's perfect right there.
All right.
There you go. So, Scott, if you don't mind introducing yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about what you're about, and then I'd like to hear after that what happened in your head after our conversation last night and you read that amendment which allows for prison slavery.
Yeah, in the Alabama Constitution. Well, I'm I'm a 35-year-long singer, songwriter, musician, and I've had a little bit of publishing. I've been a working class man all my life to make ends meet. Like anybody else, we live paycheck to paycheck. Can't build a savings account. And I probably touched on a lot of different fields, a jack of all trades kind of in a way. I got interested in running for office and serving my community when I noticed that our town had gotten very deteriorated. We're a small town here. A lot of small towns across the country, across the nation, are suffering that same effect from manufacturing leaving and stuff like that. We've been a mill town here forever, and when we lost paper and textiles, we haven't recovered from that. So the economic state of my district and my community got me interested in wanting to serve. I've got a little bit of service in my blood. My mother was a teacher for 40 years. My father died in Vietnam in 1967 as a career Army Staff Sergeant. He was there to as a part of an advisory team. died 3 days in country. So, you know, public service, I think, is just a sort of a natural step for somebody who come from my background in music, who had a lot of ideals to, that whole saying about music can change the world. When you're a young person, you kind of hope that you might be able to affect people's emotions and change, people through music. Now, being 53 years old, in my mid stage of life, I guess, and with a couple little children, because I had children late, I'm very concerned about the future of my kids and their peers, and families who suffer injustices, families who suffer economic struggle, just like we do, or families who are worse. Now, I don't have a district that's we don't even have we don't have a prison in my district, so I don't have a direct contact with a prison that's going to be affecting or that I'm affected by as a citizen in this district. But now we do have, as y'all know, some overcrowded prisons in Alabama. We are about sitting on, I believe it was either 24 to 29,000 and a capacity of 14,000.
200%.
200%. And that is absolutely unacceptable. We're waiting on Kay Ivey, our interim governor, who came in after a very embarrassing Republican governor who got put out of office, carried out on a log, basically, because his sex scandals and behavior. And we had a lot of corruption in Montgomery with Republicans. They have been the party of get tough on crime ideology, and I believe that they've affected directly the mass incarceration and the 200% rate that we have in our prisons right now. Our prisons are old. They need massive reform, massive remodeling, or we're going to have to build something new to replace them with. But now there's a large resistance to people in Alabamians who are against building new prisons. I don't think we're all against building a new and better prison to house what we need to house or to house capacity, but expanding on capacity is what worries us the most. Expanding on capacity. If we begin expanding on capacity, if we start building prisons to create more units, then we know for a fact that under this Republican ideology for getting tough on crime, then we're not going to see justice reforms, and they're going to try to get convictions in order to fill those units. As far as taking a look at the Alabama Constitution last night, yes, you brought that to my attention. And I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that it included an exception clause as well. But I would like to go a little bit further too and say even on the 13th Amendment, the exception clause is remarkable. It's remarkable that it's just now getting the attention it deserves. I don't know that there was a preponderance of Americans who understood that the exception clause was there.
Yes, there has always been abolitionists fighting against legalized slavery. Even Frederick Douglass himself denounced the emancipation as a stupendous fraud after traveling through South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. He did that on the anniversary of the emancipation in Washington, D.C. So throughout history, there's been people talking about it, but there's also been a fight to silence those voices, because what we're talking about is crimes against humanity. It's not something that people are just going to say, okay, I did it. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
And we are, go ahead.
Well, I was just, you're absolutely correct. And it just seems like just now it's just really starting to take off in the mainstream. What you're talking about, abolitionists talking about it back then and stuff like that, where was that in the history books?
Well, Scott,
where was the exception clause for us to learn about, as
exactly,
children in the history books? So it
exactly.
just goes to show that the history books have been, incredibly manipulated.
Scott, this is Sky T
Hey,
asking
Scotty.
you a question. Well, not I don't really have a question, but I'm in agreement with the sentiment that you expressed that this is a failure of education, and it's a blatant failure of education, not for Americans not to know something so important about the U.S. Constitution. And it's also an indictment on the larger society for, it's one thing, yeah, teachers should be teaching it, should be included in the lesson plans. By the way, when they said that slavery was over, they put an exception in there that, hey, if they convict you of a crime, they can put you into prison where thereby you'll be leased out to private corporations, or the state will make money off of that free labor. Or as some say even today, will save money by using prison labor, as Kamala Harris, a member of your party, once argued against, her office argued when the Supreme Court told them that it was unconstitutional with the overcrowded conditions that they had. And she was like, if we get rid of her office, because she didn't argue with herself, but it was her office, argued that we will be depleting California of its cheap labor pool. But, Scott, I did when it was the so-called 150th anniversary of the 13th Amendment, Spielberg did a movie. They even had a ceremony with all these, Congress, important people in Washington, D.C. attending. And they were celebrating the 13th Amendment as if it abolished slavery. But I made a video of every article I came across online that was talking about it. And to each and every one of them, none of them published the entire 42 words of the 13th Amendment. It went like this, quote, involuntary servitude and slavery shall be abolished, ... Left all the other words out. And that's intentional, don't you think, Scott? So don't feel bad that you didn't know, or it was just come to your attention. And it is an indictment on the education system, but an indictment on the larger society. But I did not know until I was 45 years old, and I'm 51 now.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing? And I like to say that Kamala's statement about, and I believe that I was told, Max filled me in last night, that was about firefighters in California. And obviously, California has a great problem with forest fires. So using prisoners, convicts, to fight fires would not be a terrible thing to think about if they were being compensated and they were being trained as firefighters. I mean, that seems to me that would be a great path to a job or some sort of job security in California if a man was able to get out on parole and proceed with that sort of training and that sort of experience. But that's not what they're doing, are they? They're using them as slave labor, and it's just about throwing them to the wolves.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That is what it is. And the biggest secret that's been kept from us is the secret of convict leasing. And that's mainly because it was so embarrassing globally that to this nation, the cruelty that they were inflicting upon people, that in 1928, after a cave-in in the state of Alabama, where 128 people were killed in this cave-in, all of them black, they were forced to abolish the convict leasing system. They were forced to abolish it at that time in Alabama. But they didn't stop because, as you know, in Alabama today, there are factories built into the prisons where they're manufacturing goods and services for companies like McDonald's. And they're also shipped out to work in different facilities, and they're getting paid nothing. Like, that's what Alabama's average pay in there for prisoners who work while in prison is zero. As a
Right.
matter of fact, if you don't work, you're tortured, put into solitary confinement, threatened, and brutalized. And I'd like to ask several questions of you tonight in regards to what's happening in Alabama today that you may or may not know about. And if you do find out from his today and you're able to do something about it, that would be a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that I'd like to talk to you about or ask your opinion about is just recently there was another no bid contract for $360 million that was given to Wexford Health, a company that has been the subject of legislative scrutiny because of its proximity to a prison bribery scandal in Mississippi. I don't know if you know what happened in Mississippi, but the entire state was shown to be corrupt. And the commissioner, longtime commissioner Christopher Epps, is now in prison for 20 years. He's turning state evidence that's going all the way up to the governor of Mississippi. And they believe that Alabama is working with the same people doing the same thing. And just recently, we've had Alabama give $360 million in a no-bid contract to this healthcare provider that does not provide adequate healthcare.
Yes, well, that's not something that I've been aware of. Obviously, stories like that don't. We rely on underground journalism to give us that kind of thing. When I say underground journalism, I don't mean like not dark journalism or anything like that, but like Alabama.com would be one that would come to mind, where that's basically just internet journalism. It's not something that's put out in print. It doesn't make our state
We
wide
call it citizen
paper print.
journalism. Citizen
Go ahead.
journalism is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, okay, that would be a good term for it. So I mean, we really rely on those entities, those journalistic that journalistic integrity to go out and seek those stories out. And a lot of that stuff, they have to really kind of be around Montgomery to find it out. Listen, I wouldn't be surprised at all that Alabama would be involved in that in the same way, because we are still full of Confederate daughters and sons in this state. We still have segregation in this state. That was shown mostly in how our districts were drawn and gerrymandered. If you looked at my district before the redrawing just happened now, where we went up to 28% black, but before we were like 79% white, 20% black, and then there was that 1 or 2%, of other ethnicities or whatever. Above me was 32, which has gone to a Democrat, Barbara Boyd, which was exactly the opposite. Now, we've changed the line since then, and I've picked up some more black populations just by redrawing the lines a little bit. But it struck me, the obvious segregation that was there, just even in the drawing of the districts and the gerrymandering.
So, in regards to this incident that I was just talking to you about with your governor and the no bid contract just handed out like a freaking party favor for $360 million to a company that has been shown to literally let people die for lack of care and not provide sufficient health care, and skimming all of that money into their corporate pockets. Is there anything that you think you can do about that? And the information, by the way, that I just provided came from one of your local independent Alabama newspapers.
Right. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. I can, in a position that I'm in, just trying to, as a candidate, trying to find my way through a campaign, being, sort of a novice at this. I'm not really a politician. I don't come from a background of being an attorney or.
You got a little bit of experience in criminal justice, though, right?
I do, yeah. I studied criminal justice at JSU before I enlisted in the Navy, and it fascinated me, and the law fascinates me. So I'm very interested in being a legislator. I think maybe I had a little bit more of a calling to be in the legislature than I did being a mayor, which of course I didn't win that election. They I elected a mill guy for that. And this, like I said, this is a mill town, but that's neither here nor there. Uh,
Oh, trust me, I can relate.
as, right, as much as I can do, as a candidate in a position, is just try to bring awareness to it and talk about it in my campaign, and uh, I will commit to doing my research, making sure I get the exact information on that, and start bringing it up in my campaign and my speeches. Absolutely, just like I'm bringing up some other things that I'm finding out along the way. Um, One thing I was telling you about last night, Max, was my campaign is a little different campaign. I'm not promoting systemic, by the numbers type of plans and solutions and answers. My campaign is more of an open discussion. I operate from a core set of values. Is how I intend to lead when I'm in office. Obviously, when you win an election and you're able to go into office and you're actually serving, then you have a lot more information available to you, a lot more power to obtain that information, and so that's how I intend to use the office. But basically, I'm operating from a core set of values,
I have
and I think that core set of values for me is what's going to lead me in campaigns to end a lot of the injustices that we have. I would like to see uh, finding out what I've been finding out since I've connected with Unheard Voices and Swift Justice, and being privy to the information that they've been sharing with me. It's been very enlightening to me, and I'm now starting to incorporate that into my campaign and speak about it. And the more knowledge that I'm receiving, more information, and more I'm empowering myself with that knowledge, I'm able to speak more intelligently on the matters.
well.
And I
I
hope
hope
that it's
Scott.
resonating.
I hope, Scott, that means that you'll become a regular listener of New Abolitionist Radio every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And if you're busy, there's always the podcast. But I do have a question. Now, on this program, we do keep the focus, do our best to keep the focus on prison slavery through the 13th Amendment. But we have these other issues that are related to that, like what people call police brutality, we call slave catcher violence, because police, unfortunately, are fulfilling some of those same roles pre-1865 slavery, enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act and other racist and aptly named slave codes. So it's not that I'm trying to badmouth law enforcement. I know they got a real big lobbying group out there, but I think we had to come to grips with this and looking at that issue and how it intersects with slavery and the modern role that they play in that institution still being allowed to legally exist. But I have a question for you as about the process, though. All right, because it's wonderful. It doesn't matter to me that you are not up to date on the issues as political junkies are, but you have a calling to provide that service, as you just said, and you're educating, you're going through the process. You said it's an open dialogue. Now, that's great, and I love that. But is there any concern on by members of your campaign or by you yourself that the DNC may be putting its fingers on the scale of the election and endorsing that their chosen candidate over you? Because I don't know if you saw the story out of Colorado recently. The candidate's name escapes me, but he calls himself a Democrat / progressive. And he recorded Steny Hoyer, the number 2 man for what's her name, Nancy Pelosi. She's the House Minority Leader, so he would, I guess, be the minority whip. But the number 2 guy being secretly recorded, which wasn't against the law in California. It's a one-party state, so he didn't violate any laws. But he recorded this guy admitting that they funnel money to their preferred candidates, and this is in a primary, of course. They want their guy, and ideals don't matter. grassroots support don't matter. Polling doesn't even matter. We have our person that we want, our candidate, and we're going to throw the full weight. And to me, that's, people talking about the Russian narrative, that kind of undermines their arguments when they're not concerned about similar things that have been confessed to, even in a lawsuit, that are going on in the Democratic primary process. So do you have any of those concerns about the DNC? Have you had any communication with them? Had they become involved in your race there?
Right. No, they haven't become involved in my race. Now you realize I'm with the I'm running with the Alabama Democratic Party. Of course, I'm sure that they have their connections and stuff like that. But I can tell you that it does exist in Alabama. We can look to the special Senate election last year in 2017, where Doug Jones ran against Roy Moore, and I believe it's quite obvious that the DNC was favoring Doug Jones in that campaign and his campaign. And we see now, Doug, he was a U.S. attorney, so he had those connections, right? I can remember who all his opponents were at this point. That primary moved by us pretty quick. Doug was the most promoted candidate in District 3, in my district right now, where the Mike Rogers holds that seat, and he's held it since, I believe, 1998 or something like that. But he's been a pretty regressive guy, a pretty regressive Republican. I thought about running against him because Jesse Smith, who is a fine gentleman, a veteran, who I've become friends with, ran against him twice. And he came as close as he could to beating him without any DNC help whatsoever. Well, now we have, as I was looking into the running for the U.S. Congressional seat here in District 3, rumors began to float that there was someone over from Auburn who was being courted to enter the race. Come to find out, that person is former Miss America. She's 29 years old, absolutely zero experience in politics whatsoever. There's no doubt in my mind she raised $17,000 in a matter of 3 or 4 days. And this was right before leading up to her going down and actually paying to qualify. There's no doubt in my mind that there were DNC operatives working in her favor. She also had celebrity operatives working in her favor. So you're not telling me anything that I'm not aware of there. I do believe the DNC picks favorites. I do believe that they funnel money into those campaigns. I do believe that they send campaign operatives and team members, to work on their campaigns, and it provides them a great advantage against, say, like the Dia Winfrey, who's right up here above me in Talladega, who's also running for that seat, and she's got about $8,000 in her campaign funds, and she's not seeing that sort of fundraising success. So, I can only hope that she will be able to get her message out and compete with the former Miss America. Now, I'm not getting down on her. It wouldn't be right for me to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I am saying that by example, it's a pretty obvious.
Yeah, outside forces thing. Outside of the state picking and choosing, interfering in I feel like undermining democracy. So the reason I asked that question is because the DNC, and I understand you making a distinction between the Alabama Democratic Party versus the DNC, but the DNC, and by default the Democrats, and I'm talking in Congress, and it's usually that way in the houses, have been fully supportive of prison slavery. I mean, Hillary Clinton had to get called out by a Black Lives Matter activist in Boston for accepting prison lobbyists' money, and the DNC did not work to really pass a bill that was introduced to abolish private prisons and the profiting off of prison slave labor. So that's why I asked that question. Would there be any impediment that you see coming from the establishment to prevent your abolitionist aspects of your platform, progressing?
I don't know that they've even heard about it. I doubt that seriously that they have. I don't believe they're keeping up with me. I haven't had anyone reach out. But talking about the Clintons and what we discovered about them, it was Bill who, which at the time I was very proud of him. I thought that he was a great president, but we look back to the 1990. Was it 1990? Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 1996 crime bill that he put through, which
1994.
1994, right? Which brought in 3 strikes you're out, and some mandatory sentencings.
Yes.
And a lot of and now they're apologists for that, and they're apologizing for their role in what's become a very serious problem in mass incarceration now. I don't know how serious we can take them.
We're one of the few that really went in.
Hey, Max, one last question before you move on.
Yes.
Scott, where do you stand on the abolition of prisons? There was a bill introduced into Congress in 2016. It didn't get very much establishment support, but it would abolish all private prisons, and only states would be able to maintain and operate prisons, and it wouldn't be traded on a stock market just like slaves were traded on blocks on Wall Street back in the 80s.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can tell you that I have been and am publicly stating that I am firmly against the privatization of prisons. I believe that once we introduce the profit motive into the prison system, we just end up creating a cycle that's going to try to feed itself. When you have a profit motive, you're obviously going to try to operate that system based on the supply and demand business model. I've composed a argument today for abolishing the exception clause, and this was just a beginning to my thoughts on how I would present an argument in the House in Alabama. Now, I would like that argument to extend past Alabama, of course, and go to the U.S. Congress and start to begin talking about abolishing the exception clause in the 13th Amendment. And from there, if we could do that, then we can start to address the justice reforms of, from top to bottom, that would be more in a moral vein, as well as looking at the economic factors in order to make the argument very convincing. But I've got 2 versions of it. I made a short, simple version of the argument, but I had a longer one as well, if you'll bear with me. The question, why should we abolish the exception clause? Because when the state values cost savings on labor by indulging itself in coercion of involuntary servitude as punishment for crimes, it ensures a requirement for convictions to supply a demand for units to fulfill quotas created by expenditure. Understand? Created by an expenditure. In other words, an expenditure is creating that demand of its own making, thereby causing a compulsion in the state to increase the rate of prosecution, effecting treatment under the law, and the creation of laws to expand on the possibility for infractions to the law. The simple version of that was when the state seeks to secure savings in labor costs by indulging in coercion of involuntary servitude as punishment, it ensures a demand for convictions imminent to supply the expenditure. Understand? Imminent to supply the expenditure, causing a compulsion for expanding prosecutions by effecting treatments under the law.
I think that's a great proposal, Scott, and very codified, Americanized language that doesn't even bring up the issue of race, but just points out this language in law that increases the likelihood that we'll have plenty of slaves for, the state to profit from, or quote unquote save money. But in the economic,
isn't language so important? I mean,
yes,
our
it is.
entire Constitution, everything is based on the language that we use. And you'll notice I didn't say by affecting equal treatments under the law. To say equal treatments
right.
Tends to bring another factor in there, because there was a time in this country when we considered black people to be unequal. So if you were to add that word, right? If you're to add that word, then you're eliminating the ability for everyone to be included under that statement.
Right. Max?
Yes, sir. There was a couple of things I did want to get across, but I wanted to be able to open the line up in case anyone wants to call in and ask you a few questions. But let me get mine out the way as quick as possible. First, this is not the question, but it is a question. Will you be visiting the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration there in Alabama?
I will at some point, yes. I haven't made any direct plans at the moment, but I do intend to.
I think it would be a really good idea, especially after having a conversation with slavery abolitionists on air,
right?
To go in and take a look and get the feeling of the place right there.
Yeah, I've seen the online video and watched the opening. When they opened it and stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Impressive, very impressive.
Yes. I plan on going to see it myself. You said that you're against the privatization of prisons, but I just want to make something clear. Private prisons are an issue, yes, but the privatization aspect doesn't end at the prisons. Even the state, federal, and local facilities, as I mentioned earlier, with the governor giving his $360 million handout, are dealing directly with private industries that supply goods, services, healthcare, you name it, for the prisoners in these federal, state, and local institutions. So whether you're in a private prison or not, there's still at least a dozen vultures sucking the blood out of you through private industry.
Right.
And that's all pushing this thing to be even worse and worse and worse. And you asked earlier about why is it popular now? Why people started talking about it now? Because we all knew, and to some degree, people have always known, but why now? And I'd like to say that New Abolitionist Radio has had quite a bit of success in making that happen. That was our goal. And
congratulations too. Congratulations on that, and thank you for being there. To bring that message to the people.
Yeah, we were like a broken record for 7 years straight, all the time until it started spreading.
I'm so sorry it took so long to to really take off. I think the documentary, was it the 13th?
13th, yes.
The Netflix documentary. I believe that was very impactful on bringing it more to the mainstream.
You're absolutely right. People are actually having discussions all around the country. Lawyers, guilds coming together to watch this film, professors, students, everything. I've been part of at least a dozen of them. It was a big help. But it's also part of other instances where this type of information has come out wide scale and globally. So the movement is real, and it's really taken a lot of traction now. We've had many abolitionist candidates. As a matter of fact, a year ago today, we had David Culmer here, who was running for Congress in South Carolina on an abolitionist platform. And you remind me very much of him. So,
okay.
Yes, you both seem to care, really care, and took the time to try to work this out in your head. And that's really all we're asking for. It's 47 words long, the 13th Amendment. Anybody with a fifth grade education can read it and think. That's all you need to do. Right. And in this climate, it's hard not to see how it actually works. Here's my question for you. I don't know if you know about the Free Alabama movement or Kinetic Justice, what he's been going through. Mm-hmm. He helped organize some of the prison slave labor work strikes that have been going on throughout the prisons across America. And because of that, he's being tortured right now. He's I think he's like 4 years in solitary confinement. Right. And we know that human rights networks and international organizations have all said that is torture. So
Yes.
if there's anything you can do to help that brother out of solitary confinement after all these years, would you be willing to do that?
I would be willing to do that. Absolutely, I would. And I would hope that, from the power of the office, if I can get in the office, that I'll be able to apply the power of the office to, sort of try to affect that.
Thank
Not
you.
only affect that, but affect, a lot of the prison injustices that are going on. So I was talking to Swift one day, and we were talking about, him trying to get his message out to legislators and not getting much feedback, or anything like that. And I said, well, listen, man, it's from the standpoint of where I'm at, I'm trying to, first win a campaign in a centralized central Alabama district that's pretty strongly has been pretty strongly Republican. Maybe running against what would be a 40-year-long incumbent who's been in there since 1978 if he wins his primary. But I told him, I said, if I'm able to get into the office, you'll see me down there. And he warned me that, when legislators or media or whoever comes down to visit and stuff like that, they roll out the red carpet and they change things up and they don't let them in certain areas. And so I think that would be an advantage to me if I am able to win. It would be an advantage to me to be loaded for bear with that certain knowledge, to know how that when I'm being hoodwinked on a tour or whatever, or not being able to speak to the people that I want to speak to, I have to go down there and ask directly for them, and I actually would do that. That I would make a commitment to that. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to get across. There's so much more we could talk about, and likely you and I.
Well, they want to silence him. They want to silence him because he has power, right? He has power to move people inside.
That's exactly it. And not just inside, internationally, people took.
Internationally, absolutely.
It's why they're fighting so hard to get rid of cell phones from prisons, even though it's the guards who are bringing them in, because they don't want people to know what's going on inside these prisons. Once those doors close, the cameras ain't showing you nothing unless you dig really deep. And here we have dug very deep. I tagged you in on some things that you need to know about. The first being what's happening in the Mississippi prison system and why they think that it may be happening in Alabama. This is a huge. So if you just check out the Rachel Maddow Shocking Corruption, Exposure in Prison System, I tagged you on it. That would be a beginning. It would really open your eyes to what is happening systemically to people of color, particularly in the state of Alabama.
Right.
Scotty,
be happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Scotty, was there anything that you want to ask?
Yeah, I'll just make a recommendation if you want to, in a historical context, because you never know when you're armed with that knowledge, how you can use that knowledge. But for historical context of modern day slavery and human trafficking, as we discuss it as it pertains to all of these exception clause, not just in the U.S. Constitution, but also in the Alabama Constitution, is to watch the documentary or read the book Slavery by Another Name, which goes directly from the stupendous fraud of the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, and then convict leasing. Because just to put it in simple layman terms, that's what we're looking at all across this nation is a re-energized convict leasing system that has been incentivized by those expenditures you talked about earlier. So check that out. And
what we need to do though is we need to change that that idea of involuntary servitude to something that's voluntary. We need to provide a reward system there. If
pay them fair wages.
Prisoner is rewarded and has incentive, IGT has an incentive to do good time and work towards a parole that is more of a right or a guarantee to him that he has to look forward to, and then if he's compensated, so that if he does get that parole and he has something to start out on, then we reform rehabilitation. We reform our parole system, and we incentivize better behavior inside, which creates more safety for everyone. The prisoners and correction officers alike. And we cut down on cost and like healthcare cost and injuries and oh man, it just goes on and on.
And list of information I said I provided with you and tagged you on it. One of them is called Our Freedom Bill. It's a prisoner's bill of rights from the Free Alabama movement.
I've read it.
Yeah,
well, Scott,
I have it. I have it on PDF in my folder.
Perfect.
Well,
perfect.
Scott,
I got both of those and the relief bill too.
And Scott, I just want to say the key thing that stood out to me tonight that I heard from you was, if we just change that exception clause, then being the operative word, we get into reforming all of the related, laws and systems that have been set up. That's very key, because I call it the first domino. That,
it is.
That while we're fighting against, simultaneously fighting against issues of police violence or violence in jails and other systemic abuse like that, which are in fact crimes, but focus, if we can really get the energy and the resources behind changing the exception clause. Colorado almost did it. Private prisons poured in money and ads on, I think it was Proposition T, which would have changed this, removed the exception clause. So that right there, is very key. And they know it. Those who profit from it know it. So that I'm glad you said those things, that it's about priorities, man. And that's that first domino to fall, and then the rest will fall. But thank you. Right. That's all I have for you tonight.
We have to remove that. Right. We have to remove that as the main driver, because that's the main driver.
It doesn't matter where you're at in the world. If there's a loophole to be exploited, no matter how criminal it is, it will be exploited. It's as simple as that. And that's what we're allowing with this 13th Amendment exception clause. It's why today anybody in the world can go to a online broker or call their broker and buy prison stocks, which is basically, in effect, owning people. Well,
absurd. Absurd. I call BS on that.
And that's the official statement.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it is BS. What we want to do is take a commercial break real quick. When we come back on the other side, we want to open up the phone lines if anybody has any questions for you. You're listening to New Abolitionist Radio here with Scotty Reed and Max Parthis. We're talking with Christopher Scott Brewer, and we'll be right back after these messages.
No, I'm not a writer. Okay.
Black Talk Radio since 2008, providing new black media for the masses.
Peace and welcome back to New Abolitionist Radio. If you have a question or a comment, you can call in at 704-802-5056. If you're already on our uberconference.com/Black Talk Radio Network page, you can just unmute yourself by pressing ***. Scotty, anyone?
Yeah, Otis is on the board. Otis, thank you for calling in to New Abolitionist Radio. What did you think about the conversation we had with Scott there, Christopher Scott Brewer, who's running for District 33 in Alabama?
Oh, I'm loving the conversation. You guys covered a lot of stuff on there. And how you doing, Scott?
I'm doing good. How are you, Otis?
I don't know for sure how you got your campaign going, but I'm an old dog in these kind of fights, and I'm gonna give you a suggestion that might be able to help you out. We cover a lot of stuff here, and one of the things that you were talking about an incentive in the system for the prisoners. There's another driver behind this too. None of these states are putting money into public defenders, which means most of them have some really huge cases, and the case overloads are forcing people to plead guilty. I think they call it pleading to daylight is one of the terms that's used. I was going to offer you a suggestion that if you're not sure if you can get somebody to speak out for you, if you talk to a few of the public defenders down there in the area, you might find some people that'll be willing to work hard for you. Right. If you're talking about funding them so they stop having these 150, 160 case overloads and not being able to give people adequate representation. Another suggestion is you're about 50 miles away from a gentleman who's a commentator on politics, and he's in the Birmingham area, and Eric Welch Guster. If you look him up on Facebook, you might be able to talk to him and be able to assist you with getting some people behind you in that area, because he covers a wide swath in that Alabama area.
Eric, I'll look him up. Thank you, and I'll take that advice to heart.
We're a very helpful community when it comes to what we're about. If we find a candidate who sees what we see and is willing to work hard and put this as a priority, we'll back them as best we can and get everybody we can to do so as well.
Right. Well, we're in an immediate urgency here in Alabama. I mean, the federal courts have already intervened. So we have an urgent situation going on right now. And we've got, I believe it's a company from Atlanta, who is another private company, you know, and they're supposed to offer some recommendations for Kay Ivey, the Confederate daughter of the South. So we'll see how that goes. But you know, I don't know what the situation will be by the time I get to my election, which is in November, because I don't have an opponent for the primary. But we'll see. We'll see what they have on the plate.
Okay, well, if you get the opportunity, I really would love to have a text version of what you said earlier, the thoughts on making a difference with the 13th. I'd love to have that and send it out so people can see what you're about and how you feel about this.
Did I hear Scott correctly? Excuse me. Did you say you don't have a primary opponent?
That's correct, yes.
Wow. That's a great platform to be able to share.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a great platform to be able to share abolitionism with Alabamians. Right.
And I've already been doing that. Not in the direct term abolitionist, but I'll start using it a little bit more, I believe.
Yeah, and you know, don't. Sometimes people get a little confused when we say abolitionism. We're talking about abolitionism in this truest sense, the same abolition that Harry Tubman talked about and Frederick Douglass talked about, because it's legalized slavery. And I know that's a shock to the system, but it changes how you see everything after that. And that's what we've been trying to get people to understand. You can't treat slavery the same way you would treat mass incarceration. Mass incarceration, there's no laws against that. There's no international laws that protect you from mass incarceration, but from slavery, there are laws that we could use on these same instances. And we've been very successful in those in the past, particularly with RICO charges. As a matter of fact, Alabama suffered RICO charges recently, as we talked about the other day, with their for-profit private probation companies who were literally forced to take up roots and get the hell out of Dodge.
Right, and we just went through that experience too. We just our mayor almost got caught up in that because we had a contract with that company, JCS, that was here, and they got targeted for the running a debtor's court. They would get people hung up in something like a traffic ticket. And they're poor people, they can't afford, to pay $150, $200 on a traffic ticket, and then an added $120 something or $130 something for court costs. So they, put it off for a little while. Then they get their driver's license suspended. Then they get arrested again. Next thing you know, they're in the back into that parole. They were back into that parole system. Who, by the way, is relinquished by the state to that being a private entity handling her. This is one case, and I'm speaking of in particular. This was a lady over in Vincent, and she was literally harassed. And then a private company was able to get a warrant put out on her for the debt that she owed on her parole fees. And they ended up putting her in jail. Now, this happened over and over and over and over.
Both debtors' prisons and prison leasing are supposed to have been abolished in Alabama. And yet they are both in practice in Alabama right now. And that's a crime. That is literally a crime, especially when you can prove it, as you can do easily. Well, unless there's any other questions, Scotty, did you have anything else before we start to close it up?
No, I'd just like to wish Mr. Brewer good luck with your campaign. Anything we can do to help, just let us know through your contacts with the program. But thank you for the views that you expressed tonight and coming to, the true knowledge about slavery in this country, in Alabama in particular, that we've been lied to for however many years we've been alive in the United States about slavery being abolished, and that exception clause is the proof right there. So thank you for spending time.
And the key.
That's
the key. Right.
The domino.
Before we get off here, though, I would like to weigh in on one thing.
Sure.
Can I weigh in on the Kanye thing?
Yes, I'd like to do that. And I also want you to give us any information you want to provide, how people can contact you or support you in any way.
Yeah, okay? Sure. Well, you can go to my website, which is brewerforallhouse.com. That's going to be BREWER FORAL house.com. And then all of my my Twitter and my social media page on Facebook are under the same thing, brewerforallhouse.com. I believe the Twitter has got a number 4 in it for the 4. You can connect with me there and see tweets, and that's where I'm really sharing a lot of my thoughts and jotting a lot of my platform stuff down. But at the campaign site, there's a platform layout there as well. As my interview from the Daily Home, which is in the media section. And also I have a news tab there where I write blogs, and I'm supposed to be there for like updates and stuff like that, and most candidates would put something there like, enjoyed being at the Lions Club thing or whatever, but that's not how I'm, operating. I'm operating as a blog, and I'm speaking freely and openly about informing my opinions and reporting my opinions and writing my dissertations on how I intend to lead and what I intend to go after.
I'm glad that you are a man who is guided by morals, ethics, and principles. I heard you say that earlier, and I'm appreciative of that. So you want to say something about Kanye?
Oh, I just wanted to weigh in on the whole thing about his
Kanye,
talk about
Scott,
prisons.
Scott.
He was speaking as a metaphorical thing. I believe the normal saying would be that we're slaves to the system, or that it's a mental slavery. And then he didn't like the fact that they were using the word slavery, so he changed it to prison. And it was a metaphorical thing. It wasn't a physical thing.
All right.
Scott, before you go, I think we do have one more call. Are you up to take this call?
I absolutely am, yes.
Okay, looks like we have a call from your state. 251, your mic is open. Thank you for calling New Abolitionist Radio. State your name. Go ahead with your question or comment for our guest tonight.
Peace, y'all. It's Tad. How's it doing? Great broadcast report.
Good. I'm great. Man? How are you, Tad?
I'm well. Appreciate it. I had a question just because, and appreciate, what you put forth today, and the fact that you're coming into recognition of abolitionism and the 13th Amendment and the rest. Now, what I'm wondering about, because you've mentioned multiple times now as far as your candidacy being guided by core values, a core set of values. And I was just wondering, pardon if I missed this portion of it, if you touched on this, but if you could share with us what that core set of values entails.
Well, it is the key value that I have is honesty. I've always been told that my father was honest to probably a fault, and I found that in myself. My mother used to say that she always knew when I was lying because I just wouldn't say anything, right? So if I didn't want her to know something and she asked me about something, instead of lying about it and telling her a story, I just wouldn't say anything. So I have a really hard time with guilt. So that's that for me is where I base a lot of my principles is from honesty, uh, integrity. Integrity means a lot to me. If my integrity is threatened, uh, anyone accuses me of not showing a good amount of uh, the integrity that I believe that I possess, then I'm going to get very defensive of that. Um, Accountability. Take responsibility for what you've done in your life. Take responsibility for the power that you're going to implement. You know, as a leader, as a legislator. Um, uh, just those kind of principles to me are the foundation of who I am.
Awesome.
So
There's an
honesty
interview also
and
on his
integrity.
webpage tag where he talked about a lot of those things. That's where I learned about his principles and such on his news page. Well, actually, it says media. So if you go to the website and click media, you'll see the interview there.
Tag, did you have anything else? Great question, by the way.
Much appreciated, Brother Scotty, and to you, Brother Max. I will check out the website. My follow-up question, if you have time, Scott Brewer, is, and pardon again if this was already covered, but how did you come into contact with Swift Justice, and what is your relationship with Free Alabama Movement?
Well, that's easy enough. I was contacted on Twitter and asked a question from a very um,
Naisha.
yeah, Naisha, man, she's awesome. She rocks, you know, and she wasn't pushy about it, but she wasn't going to take no crap either, you know. So I believe, you know, I might have been, I believe I surprised her a little bit because I was open to answer her questions, and then I believe she was surprised by a few of my answers, and she we were first engaging in tweets back and forth, and she was tweeting back like in between some of my thoughts. She asked me one question, and I gave her like a 5 bullet answer, and she was like, you know, coming in to ask me questions in between. I was a long thought, and I'm kind of guilty of being long winded sometimes, but I like to be in depth. I believe that a people deserve for to know fully what you're trying to get at, you know. So that's how we came in contact, and from there that conversation continued. She put me in contact with our contact down in Atmore, Swift Justice, and I've opened up a dialogue with him, and then I did the interview with Naisha uh, on Facebook Live, and I've developed a friendship with the organization and a closeness now with Swift Justice, who's been helpful in you know, helping filling me with that knowledge that I need to know, and so that's and of course they led me to this interview tonight. So I'm, you know, very thankful of that, and I'd like to send out my thanks to them for helping me with my campaign and endorsing me and connecting me with this fine group of people here.
Thank you too, brother. Indeed. I'm just glad that we were able to enlighten you a little further, not only of the what we're dealing with, but the seriousness of it, because there's just so many people dying and suffering right now. So, Tag, I think he was saying that through Free Alabama Movement, his connection is through Swift Justice.
Yeah. No doubt. Appreciate that. And again, dope broadcast as ever. I'll continue to peep it out.
No doubt. Well, brother,
the board's clear
Scott?
now. So if we want
any final comments for the evening, or Scotty, you had something?
No, just want to thank him again for joining us, and I will follow his campaign and look him up on social media and follow him there. and retweet any thoughts or points of law that I'm in total agreement with to our audience, because we do have a global audience, but our primary audience is in I was about to say North America, but the United States.
I have a question. What are y'all's thoughts on the digital platform for the future of campaigning and politics and elections?
The future, well, that depends on, Zuckerberg just gave his testimony to Congress, and he pretty much throws social media under the bus. We run a nonprofit that targets black people because there's a lack of black media independently owned or from a black perspective, and not a corporate, sock puppet. No disrespect to sock puppets, but
yeah.
And,
I understand.
and so, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there laughing at my own joke. What was the question again?
Digital media in the future.
Oh, yes. Okay, so on digital media, Zuckerberg threw us under the bus. He was saying it needs to be regulated and all of that, and I'm for getting the government out of things like prison and the privatization we talked about tonight, the no bid contracts and all that. But I ain't asking for more, because Zuckerberg ain't the only platform out there, and that's a private business entity. And like I tell people, you don't just get to come on my platform that I built or represents our organization, or our organization has, public ties to. You're not going to come on and use certain language. Like, you're not going to use terroristic language. You're not going any other common decency things you would find in community guidelines. And so Mark Zuckerberg saying, well, we invite regulation. I mean, what do we need? The social media community has pretty much been self-regulated up to this point. If you get some bad information, well, that's on you if you didn't do your research, or one of your people that you in contact with will point out to you the fake news, or you should maybe look at something else. So we don't need government regulation in that. But in terms of using it as a campaign tool, I think Barack Obama, kind of was a pioneer in that. And you could learn lessons from his campaign and his deployment of social media. But from my experience, I do have experience running a social media presence for, what was the candidate name? It was a Green Party. He was running for Senate for South Carolina. I can't recall his name. But it's a very low cost way. If you don't have a big budget to pay for like TV ads, and y'all know how much that time costs, especially during a political campaign. Facebook ads, I ain't never bought Twitter ads, but I assume it's similarly priced. Will get you, a bang for your buck for what you spending, and then the way you can geo-target your audience. You can target your district. Only your district is seeing these posts. You know what I'm saying? And it's a way, like you said, is important to you, and you explained the process between you and Naisha. Having open dialogue with the community that you say you want to serve and represent. So social media is a way to bypass the filters of the corporate media and really get in touch with and have a platform or a dialogue where people could just be open and honest, and we're not just getting a bunch of talking points. So to answer your question, is a great value tool.
Thank you.
I just say that the future is now, and you are here talking about your run for the House of Representatives. That is the future. Independent media is really where it's at right now.
Right. It serves as an example.
Right, exactly. That's right where it's at right now. That's how people are learning most of their real news. They aren't even paying attention to the mainstream media anymore, and they're bleeding it out in terms of viewership.
Right. And I'd just like to say on that point too, man, for everyone who's listening, which I'm sure everyone who's listening on this network, they understand the need to be smart. Don't fall for for everything you see. You know, we went through a couple of years, man, where just we had such a great divide happen over and you know, I hate to call them out so badly, man, but conservatives and Republicans, they are just absolutely in a bubble and in an echo chamber with just absolute lies, and even when we got down to like the Black Lives Matter thing, you know, when social media was beginning to pick up and their message was coming through loud and clear. This is for all of us. You know, it's not a centralized on just black lives. It's just that black lives happen to be the
predominant victim of it.
the predominant victim of it. But it's the platform for jumping off for the message, which is for all of us. You know, this can happen to all of us.
For the first time in history, white people are being enslaved legally.
Exactly.
The 13th Amendment. It's time for them to stand up and fight for the same things that we're fighting.
Well, not just because they're white, though. You know, not just because they're white.
Well, if it was really mass incarceration, there'd be 4 million more European Americans in the prisons themselves. So they call it mass incarceration, and it's a misnomer.
Right.
But
Scott,
white people are being affected as much as 2 million are incarcerated, I think.
Yeah, Scott, I think what Max is saying, well, I know that's what Max is saying is that. Well,
I understood. I was just adding
the
that,
first.
so.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, because it is. It's a historical fact for the first time in U.S. history, not North American history, but U.S. United States of America, which is now a corporation, but that. For the first time, according to the law, a person, regardless of their skin color or status, citizenship status, can be sentenced to a term of slavery, and that's just the truth of the words.
Right, and listen, let me make sure that I'm clear on this. You know, when I talk about the Black Lives Matter message and how white people, beginning to see some incarceration stuff that they shouldn't be outraged or be concerned, because of their skin color or anything like that. What I really want to make a point about is that it's such a testament. It is such a great testament to the black community that they stand from the days of I suppose Frederick Douglass. I didn't live back then to hear the man speak, but I know Dr. King, the way he spoke, his message for civil rights, and even today at this great turning point that we're at, where we're being so enlightened and we're bringing the message out so loud and clear, a great testament to the black community that they stand for all people.
Well, we appreciate that, and
who stands for all people.
That has always been the case, that whatever affects the least among us, if we want to talk about biblical scripture, the least among us, then it eventually will work its way up to include others, if we want to talk about others. But if we're being honest, what you said is one of your core values. We are not fans of the National Black Lives Matter organization, if we're going to be honest. So we really don't endorse them. Some of the issues that they highlight, of course, we agree with. But some of even, we've talked about on this program, an article one of the founders put out, that's why Max pointed out to you on this program, we're talking about slavery abolition.
Understand.
We're not talking about...
My point was basically about the message, and the difference between how the message is received on the right, compared to how, a lot of us here on the left receive it.
Right, the bubble that they live in. I got you.
Yeah.
Right, you are right. But I remember also that one time Republicans were Democrats and Democrats were Republicans until somewhere around the 60s when they used that Southern strategy and switched places. I don't know what the hell happened, but they switched places.
Yeah, the Southern strategy, man. I didn't gravitate with that.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your words with us here tonight. I hope that we remain in communication. We'll support you in any way that we can. And please continue to speak on this issue of modern-day slavery and human trafficking through the 13th Amendment. And when we mention human trafficking, by the way, Scott, we're talking about how these prisons are shipping prisoners across state lines in order to fill quotas at prisons in other states.
Right.
And
Right.
that is human trafficking. It's supposed to be illegal. So,
Yes.
yes, thank you indeed, my brother. And I hope that you are very successful. Scotty, anything?
No, thank you, Scott, and good luck.
Thank you,
What we're going to
Scotty,
do
and
is
thank you, Max.
great, great. What we're going to do is we're going to listen to a video clip from Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, who just opened up the museum there in Alabama where you're at. And then we're going to have some discussion about what he said afterwards and go on with the rest of our stories. Please continue to listen in.
Let's
Scotty,
take an early break, and I see the video. I'll prepare the video that you posted in our uberconference.com/Black Talk Radio Network chat room. So let's take an early break,
Scotty.
Max.
You're listening to New Abolitionist Radio, where we're talking about modern-day slavery and human trafficking in the 21st century. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hi, the Black Talk Media Project would like to invite you to become a member of the BTR Community subscription-based social media platform. BTR Community is a platform that was set up for the listening audience of Black Talk Radio Network, the #1 independent black radio network online. For just $24 per year, your subscription gives you access to an interactive space to share information with like-minded people with your privacy guaranteed. Your subscription will go a long way to help us maintain and improve our current media platforms. It will also help provide a budget so that we can begin the task of establishing localized media centers and radio stations across the United States. The best way to show your support and appreciation for what we do here at Black Talk Radio is to subscribe. Help us to help you be informed. Join btrcommunity.com today.
Consciousness of how frequently we have failed to address racial bias and discrimination, I think it can hopefully increase our consciousness now. I mean, the reason why the United States Supreme Court issues the decision it issues in Shelby County, the case where they decided to retreat from the Voting Rights Act, is because they don't actually understand the weight of this history, the legacy of this history. The reason why the United States Supreme Court in McCleskey versus Kemp in 1987 talks about the inevitability of bias and discrimination in the administration of the death penalty is because they don't understand the obligation, the moral obligation to overcome this history. Our journalists do this all the time. They minimize bigotry and discrimination. They marginalize stories about racial bias. And I think to get them to understand why they should not do that, we have to remind them of how they are replicating the failures of journalists generations before them. During the Civil Rights era, most Southern newspapers were indifferent to the activism of Dr. King or hostile to it. And, you know, I've said this before. Everybody wants to think that if they were alive during slavery, they'd be an abolitionist. Everybody wants to think that if they were active during the time of lynching, they'd be railing against and trying to prevent lynchings. Most of us believe that if we were alive and in a position to march in the 1950s, we'd be on the side of Dr. King. But today, we are in the face of all of these problems. 1 in 3 black male babies is expected to go to jail or prison. There are these constant unarmed shootings of unarmed black people. And the question is, if we're not prepared to respond to these issues, if we're not prepared to act today, then I don't think we can claim that we would have acted any differently during slavery and lynching and segregation. So that consciousness for me is critical to creating our institutions, not just the press, but our courts, the police, law enforcement, our elected officials, to think differently about this continuing legacy of bias and discrimination that manifests itself all the time. And that's the challenge that I see us trying to take on with these cultural projects.
Well, there you have it. That is Brian Stevenson, who just opened the Legacy Museum and National Lynching Memorial. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and an abolitionist in modern times. And Scotty, did you hear what he was saying? There was a couple of things in there that really stood out for me, because we've said them here so many times. Like everybody talking about, if I was alive in the days of slavery, I'd be an abolitionist. I'd be doing this and I'd be doing that. But you're here now and it's happening and you ain't doing nothing.
Right. Those are arguments that have been heard in the past in New Abolitionist Radio. And it's it's not an argument, it's a point of fact that you could say you'd have been this, that, or the other during that period of slavery, as I call it, pre-1865 slavery. Right. Well, if you ain't doing nothing about the slavery that you see today, in fact, you don't even understand that what you're looking at is directly tied to slavery. The police shooting unarmed people as they was trying to make a stop, to fill a quota, to make an arrest, to put somebody into one of these institutions that the state, whether it be states, the federal government, or private entities who are profiting. So the whole interconnectedness of that. And so we've said it. You know, if you ain't an abolitionist today, what makes you think you'd have been an abolitionist then? Because even every black person, although the record shows a majority, but not every black person was part of the abolitionist movement. And Dr. King was mentioned earlier, there are even people in the community who was like, hey, I'm making a lot of money here off this segregation being the only black game in town. So if people have other options, instead of you looking at the fact that these are tax-paying U.S. citizens, and whether anyone wants to claim to be a citizen or not, you being taxed like you a citizen, and you should have the right to vote. So, you know, he is definitely on point. But I noticed, Max, the evolution of his language from the point to when he first came on the national media scene, and he was talking about it kind of like everybody else in terms of mass incarceration, and then the abolitionist community started a dialogue with him through social media and what have you, like we've had dialogue with others. And then to, you know, we got the video of you going to one of the community events where he was doing a Q&A, and you asked him about the 13th Amendment. This is a celebrated Harvard attorney, and you was like basically saying, cut to the chase. Does slavery exist or does it not, by the reading of the 13th Amendment? And he has become even using stronger abolitionists. He used the word abolitionist, you know, in his language. And I'm wondering if you noticed that evolution.
Yes, I have noticed the evolution, and I've been in contact with him since. And you're right, that did kind of push him forward, that moment in time in Columbia, South Carolina, there with all the dignitaries in the whole city in the South there paying attention and listening. And I asked him directly whether or not he thought this was slavery, and if he does he endorse an abolitionist movement? And his answer was emphatically yes, and far more than just yes, but said everybody should be asking this same question. And he's changed a lot since then, so I got to give him props for that. He also stuck a knife in the media. And I think right now he was referring to the conversation that's going on about slavery inspired by Kanye West. And you have all of these media talking heads talking about slavery and completely ignoring the 13th Amendment or the fact that we have slavery going on right now. And they're bringing in experts that don't know their head from a hole in the ground to talk about it. And that's what he said, that they are just belittling it all. Journalists have been doing it for decades, just downplaying the whole thing, and it's all racial terrorism is what's going on. So he stabbed them with a sharp knife right there in that quote.
But even more than his words is his actions, because his actions, his deeds is proof of the words that he spoke. In this new museum that he has opened up, you know, one of your mentees did an interview with him recently. I forget which network. It might have been CBS. CNN. And he showed, they showed the exhibit where it showed victims of slavery. These, to get our abolitionist language correct, it's dehumanizing to call these people slaves when they were human beings who were victims of slavery. But he showed victims of slavery picking cotton, and then he showed prisoners in prison unis picking cotton. All right. And he said in that interview, this is the direct line, that, you know, that we should be talking about this. This isn't a perception. We don't perceive slavery, and I'm paraphrasing his words. We don't perceive that this is happening. Here is the historical evidence. And, of course,
Absolutely.
the museum has the names of the victims of lynching during the so-called Jim Crow period.
I was reading or listening to a video of the opening and what to expect, and they said they got a hologram when you enter the door of somebody who died during the period before convict leasing. And I mean, I can't wait to go see something like that. It's got to be wild. And he did, as you said, Scotty, multiple times, through multiple videos and articles and interviews, showed the direct connection between chattel slavery in the 1600s all the way through the 1865 period and up till today. And in combination with the 13th film and Do Not Resist and Slavery by Another Name, these are powerful, powerful truths being exposed. So I'm looking forward to going to see that. There's two stories I want to squeeze in, Scotty. I don't know if we have time. I'm glad the other segments are short this week. But I do really want to squeeze in two stories.
Okay, go for it.
It talks about what he's saying right now. This is the first one is from NYPD. This is New York Daily News. It says the NYPD continues to target minorities over white New Yorkers for marijuana arrests, a police reform advocacy group said Thursday. Robert Ganji, the director of the Police Reform Organizing Project, said 93% of the nearly 4,100 pot possession busts made in the first 3 months of 2018 involve people of color. And this is straight from the state's statistics. They say the facts are undeniable. The New York Police Department engages in starkly racially biased practices. This is despite research and experience demonstrating that white people use and sell marijuana in proportions and numbers equal to or greater than that of Americans and Latinos. So this is a huge expose that has been coming out from New York Police Department about institutional racism and about targeting blacks. Every time you do this, you're destroying people's futures. It don't end next week when they get out of jail on bail. If they do have a job when they get out, or if they miss some payments, they probably lost everything. It take them 20, 30 years to recover if they do. And that happens thousands of times every single day. So that's the first one. I put it on New Abolitionist Radio.
Lots of money changing hands.
Go ahead, Scotty.
Lots of money changing hands with all those, each interaction.
Right. It's all about profit, and they'd rather do it to people they hate that have been institutionally programmed to think of somebody less than human or less than you. And so they become the targets. And at the same time, it's happening also in Wisconsin. Their same type of expose just came out, and they pled freaking guilty of institutional racism. The ACLU filed the lawsuit in February 2017 saying Milwaukee police routinely stop thousands of minorities without cause or suspicion. Think about that now. You're just walking down the street, no cause, no suspicion, you're just black, and that's enough to stop you. Right. Such stops are violations of the Fourth Amendment, which require police to have a reasonable suspicion that the person is dangerous or has committed a crime, the suit says. The suit also accuses officers of conducting stop and frisk motivated by race and ethnicity in violation of the 14th Amendment. The city of Milwaukee and the ACLU of Wisconsin have reached a tentative settlement in a class action civil rights lawsuit alleging that Milwaukee police engaged in stop and frisk practices targeting African Americans and Latinos. The possible settlement was approved unanimously Monday by the city's Judiciary and Legislation Committee. It must be approved by the full Common Council and Mayor Tom Barrett. As part of the settlement, $1.9 million will go towards court costs and plaintiffs' attorney's fees, according to a letter from the city attorney general Grant F. Langley. The settlement includes a 5-year consent decree that requires the Milwaukee Police Department and the city's Fire and Police Commission, the Civilian Oversight Board, to reform stop and frisk practices, improve data collection, and require officers to undergo more training on stops and searches. A consultant will monitor compliance with the agreement, which will remain under the jurisdiction of the federal court and issue periodic reports. New York and Wisconsin all at the same time. And let me tell you something. If you see it in New York and you see it in Wisconsin, it's because America is Ferguson. It's happening everywhere. This is the standard. This is not the surprise. This is the average happening everywhere.
For those,
which is why go ahead, Scotty.
For those interested, go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, put in the search term America is Ferguson. That is a series that we did for New Abolitionist Radio, where we analyzed the FBI report from what was going on in Ferguson in terms of, the police having quotas and how that worked with the jail system, the bond system, and was endorsed by the city manager. And so what we talked about that's when we came up with what later got JCS thrown out of Alabama, and that's RICO charges. I believe we were the first to apply the logic of RICO, or the language of RICO, to these civil cases pertaining to slavery. And so please look that up. Very important series. But I would also say, though, these consent decrees, we've been hearing about them for decades, and they don't seem to be solving any problems. And so they say the definition of insane is to keep doing the same thing over and over and getting the same result, and you don't change up what you're doing. So what does that tell me? That if there is no threat of slavery, if a person isn't being threatened with prison slavery, they are not incentivized to stop their behavior. So we have blatant violations of American civil liberties. Doesn't matter that they're targeting black people or targeting Hispanics, or they shouldn't be targeting anyone. So these are admitted, documented, even admitted to violations, to me, should carry criminal penalties. Maybe we need to change up that legislation instead of consent decrees, which are basically pay a fine to the victims or pay the victims' attorneys. The victims may get some crumbs left over, and, basically just a slap on the wrist. Don't do it no more. For 5 years, we're going to be watching you, but we'll be out of here. And we know what Attorney Jeff Sessions said coming in the door. These police consent decrees that, like we have with Baltimore and Detroit and any of these other cities, we're not going to be monitoring you, which is a signal to those, if you want to say, bad apples in the system, but those bad apples, that may be your partner and you looking the other way. So you know what they say about good cops. So I'm just trying to use direct, accurate language. Americans are being violated in a criminal way, all to the goal for slavery, race. You can't talk about race without talking about its roots of slavery and the slave codes, where race was first legislated in the colonies. So, that's all I have to say about that, Max. But look, we got a lot of work in front of us, but I feel good about the energy that I've experienced tonight, that, we are going to right these wrongs in our society with committed abolitionists.
I believe that too, Scotty. It's the reason why I do this every day, man, because I got a little bit of hope. You have a little hope, you hold all for yourself, and then you give a little hope away to somebody else. So yeah, man, abolition, the end of slavery is our hope, because we believe that starting with the legality, that loophole that allows it to occur, by closing that loophole, there'll be a cascade effect after that, which will result in freedom for the first time in this country's history. All right, Scotty, we're in the last few times, so let's get these final two segments out. If there's any stories that we weren't able to get out this week, you can always check it out on our forums.
Oh, we got the Abolitionists in profile. Are you forgetting that and the writer?
I have them both up right now, as a matter of fact. So, yep, I got them. So I was going to do those and our final comments. All right, I'll start with the Abolitionists in profile. Scotty, is that all right?
Go for it.
All right. I've been trying to find abolitionists nobody's really ever heard of before. I want their names to be remembered. It's our duty to remember their sacrifices. So, like last week when we found out that the father of John Brown was an abolitionist, here's another one that I found. It's abolitionist William H. Johnson. The birth of William Henry Johnson in 1833 is celebrated on this date. He was a black abolitionist, politician, and crusader for the rights of blacks. Johnson was born near Alexandria, Virginia, of free parents.
Go for it.
Johnson left home in Virginia. All right. I've been trying to find. Okay.
My bad.
Can you hear me, Scotty?
Yeah, my bad.
Okay. Johnson left home in Virginia at the age of 12 to travel to Philadelphia, where he learned to be a hairdresser. He came to Albany, New York in 1851, where he immediately became involved in the Underground Railroad. He assisted Stephen Myers in the work he was pursuing. He returned to Philadelphia in 1855, where he continues his work as an abolitionist and activist with the Underground Railroad. He became involved in the Banneker Literary Institute and with others, where he could write and speak against slavery. The work he was doing with fugitive slaves forced him to run away from Philadelphia in 1859. When the Civil War began, he joined the Connecticut Union, participating in the Battle of Bull Run, Roanoke, and New Bern. Johnson returned to Albany in 1864, where he began an involvement in local and state politics. He was a member of the NYS Equal Rights Committee and became its chairman from 1866 to 73. He drafted an amendment to the military code of the NYS, striking the word white from the document. This change was accepted in 1872. He drafted civil rights legislation that became law in 1867 and assisted in abolishing the property clause in the Constitution that prevented many blacks from voting. William Henry Johnson crusaded for and won in 1891 a bill that ended discrimination against blacks in the insurance industry. After a career including the Underground Railroad, organizing volunteers for the Union Army, political and social activism, he put together an autobiography. A copy can be found in the Pruyn, P-R-U-Y-N, room of the Albany Public Library and in the New York State Library archives. By the time of his death, he was a Grand Master in the Masons, had been a delegate to several Republican conventions, had published several newspapers, including the Albany Capital, and produced his own biography. William Henry Johnson died in 1918. And we here at New Abolitionist Radio salute you, Brother William Henry Johnson. Salute.
Yeah, so again, there are many laws on the books that are still in effect, which I learned lately when we want to talk about terrorism, race-related terrorism, or religious bigotry. The 1871 Klan Act is still on the books and enforceable, and I learned that from a local organization. It's just that they don't prosecute or they don't enforce the law. So it was interesting hearing about this abolitionist back then getting a federal law against discrimination in the insurance industry, but yet the Obama administration, when it was discovered that car loan people, as well as insurance in the insurance industry, the institutional racism and people with the same credit scores being charged far more, and they were either black or non-white, less than white people, white Americans. And so that's still going on. So we appreciate his abolitionist contributions and all the work he put in. And he put in all that work to get this law passed, and it's not being enforced today. Just like, it just reminds me the lie of slavery being abolished, but it's going on right in front of your face.
Yes, sir. All right, Scotty, our rider of the 21st Century Underground Railroad this week has been out of prison now since 2008. That's James Owens Jr. He spent 21 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit, and he was prosecuted due to prosecutorial misconduct as well as police changing evidence, lying on the stand, and on and on. He has since filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Baltimore, and Baltimore now in 2018 is about to issue him $15 million because he filed a wrongful conviction lawsuit against the Baltimore Police Department and 2 police detectives. Not only do we want to say, welcome to freedom, brother, but we also want to say, ka-ching. Now take some of that money and sponsor the abolitionist movement as much as you can. Welcome to freedom, James Owens Jr.
Welcome to freedom. And I agree.
Indeed, man. Indeed. Well, Scotty, that's the end of our program. We got only a couple minutes left to say a few things. Anything you want to close it out this week with?
I was just encouraged by our guest, Mr. Brewer, who's running in Alabama for District 33, right? District 33. I'm just encouraged, on his ability to reason in his mind from reading words on a document, which they say is the most important document, either in our state or in our nation, if we're talking about the U.S. Constitution, and realizing that I've been lied to all my life, and I'm not okay with this exception clause and committing himself to doing something about it, all based on if he wins. So Alabama, y'all need to turn out. Okay, abolitionists, spread the word. We got to get abolitionists in Congress or in our state houses so that we could tip those dominoes.
All right, Scotty. I'm going to keep mine real simple. I'm not really keen on victim blaming. I mean, I can't see it. I've studied so much of slavery, so many abolitionists. I understand so deeply that sometimes I feel like I was there just imagining what they were going through because I see the reflections of those things happening today. I'm not about to sit here and blame teen pregnancies for everything that's going on. I'm not going to sit here and blame addiction for everything that's going on. I'm not going to do anything to blame the people who are suffering at the hands of 400 years of oppression, because they're not the freaking problem. They are the results of the problem. And the problem is legalized slavery and human trafficking. Don't you think that would cause a lot of issues? Remember, abolition is a reason for a revolution, y'all, so we can finally know some peace. Peace.
Rise up, 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 rise up. Showtime. Just lift your eyes up, let your wise rise up. See the signs of the times if it's time. Rise up, rise up. When death and hell dwell among all God's people. When those we chose and trusted have become completely corrupted and inherently evil. When the feast that feeds you starves our Father's children. When